Welcome to Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. Our podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? What can we learn from them? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back. We are excited that you're joining us once again for another just engaging episode of Perusing's The Power of Values podcast. Today's a fantastic day. Our guest has just an abundance of experience in a lot of different areas, some of which you may be familiar with, others you may not. So there's a lot of learning opportunity here today. So perk up your ears, as they might say. I want to welcome Liz Green. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Oh, we're excited. I am so excited for this. Friends, don't forget, most important action you can take right now is just click the subscribe button if you're not already there on your listening device. And of course, like the podcast. And by the time we're done, I am sure you're going to have 2 or 3 people in mind. You're like, oh, they should hear this. This was really good. They need to hear what Liz had to say. And of course, we all want to know, Liz, were you born this way? Or how did your life come to bring you to the valuation and appraisal professions in one capacity or another?
Well, I don't know if I was born this way, but I always like to start out by saying I began my career when I was 4 years old.
Oh, I love this. You're budding talent.
That's right. In my hometown of South Bend, Indiana.
South Bend. Got it.
I started in the mailroom of a company that produced Rule of 78s and simple interest charts for mortgage banking.
Wow.
They started a fledgling business for loan servicing on a mainframe computer. And in today's terms, we would call that a startup. But back then, we didn't have such terminology. It was just a business service. And we had upwards of 30 or so, I have a hard time remembering,
sure,
so long ago, mortgage servicers online to us in our data center in South Bend, Indiana. Wow. And we were just a kind of a shoestring crew of programmers and key punch operators and folks like me who joined from the parent company, that Rule 78's printing business, over to the technology company because we just needed some girls to answer the phone. And that's how we didn't have anything called a help desk. We didn't have anything called project management. I would take the call from, Citicorp, and I would write down the question, and I would go to the programmer, and he would tell me the answer. And I would call the client back, and I would read them the answer. And that's how it all began back in the mid-'80s.
I love that. Now, I probably heard you wrong, Liz. Did you say you started when you were 4?
That's right.
I thought you said, I love that about you. I was like, sometimes I'm actually a good listener. My wife says not always, but I'm like, that's extremely impressive. I'm like, I had no idea what interest was back then, but more power to you. But there are a few of our maybe newer listeners. I'm not going to say young because, might be young at heart. What is a key punch operator, Liz? Help paint the picture of what was going on back in the day.
Well, so the technology that inhabits your laptop today took an entire air-cooled computer room, huge, massive machines to actually support. And it was all programmed based on COBOL and 80-byte card column strings. And those were fed into the machine on what we knew as computer cards. And they were hand punched in a special machine that we had key punch operators who would actually punch the cards, and they would be stacked in a tray in order and then fed into the computer manually. And so the big joke for our initiating a new programmer into the business was that he would have his first tray of cards and he would take it to the computer room, and the computer operator had a fake tray in the computer room. So he'd take the guy's tray and he'd bring it in, and then he'd pick up the fake tray and drop it and say, boy, I hope you numbered those cards, because you'd have to start over if you hadn't numbered all your cards.
And I mean, I've seen these before. I never had to do that. Yeah, I mean, are there like 200 cards in one of those trays?
Easily. I don't even remember how many, but those
were big trays. So they're like, what are they? 24 inches long.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the width of the card turned sideways.
Yeah, exactly.
There or
Exactly.
something else. That is one heck of an orientation for a new person coming in. Wow.
So that's why I would say I started when I was 4, because it was the mid-'80s. And, obviously a lot has changed since then. I've spent my entire career really kind of from that early origin in mortgage banking. And so loan servicing is kind of where you learn the business, right? That's where the buck stops. That's where literally everything happens after the loan is originated. And I worked in servicing for probably the first 10 years of my career.
Oh, wow.
And that took me to a number of different towns where I was working for mortgage servicers that were using that mainframe system that I supported. That was then known as Data Link Systems. It's now a part of the Sagent family. But, many moons ago, that's what we were called, Data Link Systems. And it took me to Jacksonville, Florida in the early 90s, where I began working with Merrill Lynch Credit Corp, which was a user of that loan servicing system. And from there, I did a lot of work helping institutions that were running that mainframe software in-house, on-premise is what we would call it today. And then started getting involved in consulting and started working in data integrations, new loan setup, started working in what we would call startups in the mid-'90s, and had a lot of experience with data conversion and moving data from loan servicing A to loan servicing system B, or from an origination system into the servicing system. So I had developed quite a strong interest and experience around data. And from that perspective, I got involved in the late 90s, early 2000s with a startup, and we were involved in building a loan origination system for the Canadian market.
That's amazing. And was it just because of the activity you were already involved in and some relationships that you had developed that opened that door for you?
Well, actually, I was on a plane coming from an install of the integration tool, the new loan setup tool the company I was working for was a company called Decade Systems. And I met a guy on a plane that said, you ought to come check us out, because we're building all these really great new solutions over this new thing called the internet. And so I wound up taking a job with this company as a financial services product manager.
Okay.
We were answering RFPs for everything under the sun that could be done on the internet. And again, it was the late 90s, so it was all very new. And finally, one came across my desk for mortgage loan origination. I'm like, oh, I know something about this. And I got involved with that project. And it was for a loan origination system for the Canadian market. And that company became Basis 100. And Basis 100 went live on the Canadian Stock Exchange in 2001, something like that, and entered the U.S. market by buying an automated valuation company called Solomar. And involved working with that team of folks, and again, working with data, helping them streamline and standardize public record data to optimize the AVM results. And that's really where my exposure changed from pure mortgage banking to valuation. And once I got involved with the AVM company, that's where, things started to really kind of move around from just straight up, again, mortgage banking into the valuation space. And then I got involved again with the guys from the Canadian parent company that was Basis 100. That company had been sold, and the idea of, hey, let's put the band back together, and we're going to do AMC, an appraisal management company in the Canadian market, and that company became Solidify.
Oh, I see.
And we were involved in a lot of things, and then went into the U.S. market in 2008, right alongside with what was going on with HVCC. After I left those guys, I started working with another startup on some interactive valuation technology, and got involved in the MISMO organization. And in 2010, I became the chair of the MISMO Property and Valuation services group, and I've held that position ever since. I've had a couple of co-chairs along the way.
Yeah.
I've been involved in that capacity for quite some time, and it's a labor of love. We're volunteers in the MISMO organization.
Yep.
And have had the opportunity to work with a lot of really, really great folks. It was with the beginning of that experience with MISMO that I was also doing some consulting work for a little company called Veros, and I did the initial data mapping for what became UAD for Fannie and what became UMDP's kind of second project out of the gate. First was Uniform Loan Delivery Data Set, or ULDD. Second was UAD. And UAD went live in September of 2011. And as probably most of your listeners know, we are anticipating the implementation of UAD2, or the next generation of UAD.
Yes.
And that rollout begins in fourth quarter-ish next year, 2025.
That is definitely the case. It's please go ahead.
I was just going to say, over the course of the last 4 years in the MISMO organization, working with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to help them leverage the newer MISMO structures into their new business requirements that they created for the changes that they've made with the URAR. And so all of those changes have been manifested in data changes as well.
Yeah, there's so much to get a hold of in what you've shared, which is, for some people, like, absolutely, Liz, I know exactly what you're talking about. Other people are like, it sounds like alphabet soup. I'm not really sure what's going on. If we can, for some of our listeners, just to make sure that we didn't lose them completely, you talked about the importance of early on. You're making reference to, like, hey, loan servicing is where kind of everything, both in a sense, starts and stops.
Right.
Like, why is that consistency and standardization so important in loan servicing? Because if people have never been in that space, haven't worked for a financial institution, they haven't been on the mortgage servicing side of things, like, they hear about it, but they don't really understand the scope and the scale.
Well, scope and scale is the name of the game. So servicing is really predicated on economies of scale. So the servicer works for a flat servicing fee, which is negotiated as part of that loan sale. And so it's, there's not the highs and lows of origination. There's not the, incentive that's tied to the interest rate. It is typically a flat percentage through the life of the loan. And it's changed a lot over the course of my career. We've gone from many, many servicers to a lot of big servicers.
Yes.
And have consolidated, again, because you have to get to that economy of scale.
Yes.
So efficiency, accuracy, collecting payments, remitting to investors, working with the borrowers if there's collection event, so forth. And it's really important, right? The importance, I think, that folks miss in loan servicing is that it is not only important to the investor that owns that obligation, that note, but it's important to the borrower, right? Yep. It's their home.
Yes. Yeah, it's a big, big factor. And when you talk about the idea of the scale, just, and granted that was a long time ago versus now, but could you share, like with a servicer, how many files, if that's not the right way to put it, because, you're representing investors and all the loans that they bought, like, how many files might a servicer be an annual volume that they would handle?
Oh, golly. I like to tell the story that when I mentioned that I went to work in Jacksonville for a company called Merrill Lynch Credit Corp. And when we put Merrill Lynch on the loan servicing system, they were just starting out and they were servicing the paper that they originated for primarily Merrill clients. Mm-hmm. We loaded 200 loans, but the average loan size was $600,000 in 1990.
Yeah.
So that's a much different game than the average loan size of $250,000. And we are seeing portfolios move on average of 100,000, 200,000 records. Yeah. So it's quite a interesting prospect. And the other story from back in those days is that to get the servicing business off the ground, Merrill Lynch had bid and won the servicing rights as a master servicer for an old RTC, which was the Resolution Trust Corp back in those days, portfolio of home equity loans. Merrill Lynch's mortgage business started on bringing the home equity product really to market. They were the first really to do that. So we had taken on this RTC portfolio to bring into our servicing business. And myself and the head of servicing worked with 67 different loan servicers to board 17,500 loans. So let me say that again, 67 servicers, 17,500 loans. So there were a lot of, twos and threes and 50 here and 50 there, and most of them had to be boarded by hand. But it was a very interesting experience because it was really kind of a poster child of why the RTC came into being, because there was a lot of very non-standard things going on back then.
Oh my goodness. And, it begs the question, how, for someone who's a systems thinker, you're like, oh, okay, that's great. But for people that might not be, how do you even begin to tackle that kind of volume from that range of clients and have any efficiency at all?
Well, it's a kind of a simple concept that I think applies here, and it's something from a data sciences perspective we think about. When we move data from a place, system A, to system B, a source to a target, and where you're moving the data to sets the rules of engagement.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
And so there's a process of identifying what sort of transformation has to go on from system A to move that data to system B.
Yes.
And that is honestly where MISMO really got its start, is to be able to provide standardized definitions and data structures as the transport between where you're coming from, whether it's a migration or just a request for service, from system A to system B. That's one of the exciting things that we're just kicking off in the next couple of weeks within the Property and Valuation Services group at MISMO, is we are working on a new initiative to help to provide a structure for handling the request of the new URAR without the benefit of the old form numbers, because a big change with UAD is that the form numbers go away. And so having a structure that provides that intermediary between a lender or an AMC who's going to send a request to an appraiser, instead of saying, I need a 1004, right? I need a 1004. And the AMC or the appraiser saying, in my market, a 1004 for this neighborhood is going to be X price and for Y delivery time. So if the 1004 is not a number we're going to use anymore, we need to have a way to express single family, interior, exterior, market value, et cetera, et cetera. What are the parameters of the assignment that I'm asking for? So again, from that source and target perspective, this would provide a common way to use the new language, the new terminology that will underlie the new URAR, so that everybody can be on the same page, so we don't have confusion in the field that will cost ultimately consumers time and money.
No, I think that makes a world of difference, and it sounds so easy, but there's all the pieces that have to go. Like you talk about the moving data, which sounds, the easiest way to describe it, probably that people can connect to, is at some point in their life, they've moved from one place to another. Maybe they moved out of the house for the first time, or they moved from like an apartment into a house, or they moved from one house to another. That's and right. You have to take stuff and put it typically into something like a box. And then the box gets transported to a new location. And depending on who's moving it, and whether there's planning or not that goes with it, there just may be a lot of boxes, and it's like, surprise, when you open it, you don't even know what's inside. And some people who have some experience around moving, whether they like moving or not, they might actually make a little map, like, here's where we're going from, here's where we're going to.
And they might label their boxes.
They might label their boxes like, this is Liz's bedroom, and hey, this is like mom and dad's bedroom, and that's the dining room, and that's the kitchen. And then even then, like, okay, so then you have boxes in the kitchen, and then you're like, surprise, what's inside of the box in the kitchen? You're like, I'm just looking for the utensils. I just need the utensils. I don't need all the other stuff. And until people have been through that experience a few times, you just don't realize how much mapping has to go on. First, identification, and then second, mapping from, as you said, where it goes to sets the rules of engagement for how it gets handled. Right. Once you begin the move process, before you can even begin the move process.
And that's what we call it, data mapping.
Yeah. And once you do that, suddenly what otherwise seems like maybe an overwhelming experience, not necessarily is easy, but it's not confusing and things don't get lost. And there's a level of transparency and ultimately accountability for being able to know that you're going to be able to make the migration.
That's right. And I love the move analogy, and I would take that one step further and say that if you hire professional movers and they have specialized boxes for the stemware, and they have a packing list, and they have a way that they organize the truck so they have the optimal amount of space utilized, and that they can get to your destination on time, and they can get you unloaded and set up quickly. And, it's almost like thinking about the move analogy, but that everything is fragile, because when we're moving data, data integrity is fragile, and we need to maintain that vigilance, and data standards helps us do that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point about the specialized boxes. Like, hey, I'm going to get the tall rectangular box that has the bar across for the hanging clothes. Right. This is the long hang versus the short hang, and oh yeah, this is the reinforced box because it's going to have heavy stuff in it versus the kind of larger box for things that don't weigh much. And that is a great way to put it together. How is it that obviously you started out, you were a child prodigy, of course, starting out at 4 there, doing the, back there with the programming and the cards. That's amazing.
On the job training.
On the job training. I love that. Huge fan. Get people exposed as soon as possible to expand their mind. But was that just a natural ability that you continued to find yourself from an employment standpoint being either in or drawn to, or did you kind of learn your way along because for a lot of people that may not know you, you, as you talked about, have been actively involved in data standards for the significant portion of your career. And for people that don't have an opportunity to zoom out and think about large data sets, they don't really understand how important what you've been doing is to their ability to actually use data that shows up from someone. So like natural ability, child prodigy, did you take a class on, back then it wasn't online, so maybe you ordered it off of like a infomercial? Like how did this happen?
All I can say is that, I was moving data and doing data transformation from the beginning. And it was something that I have always kind of, whether I enjoy it or, thought it was interesting or what have you. And in these different domains from, the loan record, the mortgage data to, focusing here in the last 12 years or so on specifically on property and valuation data, just really allowed me to, I really love to continue to iterate and to play forward everything that I've learned and everything that I've have accomplished or been exposed to. I just keep kind of expanding upon that. So, when I got involved in the data standards from a valuation perspective, it was just at a time in my career where I had a lot of the skills that were needed at a time when the organization was just really starting out. So I learned so much from a lot of the folks that were instrumental in bringing those standards forward. Good friends of mine still to this day, talked to our original architect yesterday, as a matter of fact. Oh. And some of those people that were very influential to me in the effort have passed. And I feel a sense of duty to their contribution and to their memory to kind of continue to play it forward. We are a volunteer organization for the most part. MISMO does employ some staff, but most of the work and the consensus building and the definition of what we do in terms of writing terms and definitions and specifications for moving data come from the volunteers. So it really is, a way to have an opportunity to give back to the industry and to the profession. And it's one of those things where, every year I'm like, well, maybe this will be my last year volunteering and then into another year. But I'm really excited about the work that we'll be doing this year because, this is going to be a big change. Everyone knows that. There's no way around that. I'm not going to try and downplay the impact of how big it is, but it's an important change, and it's one where I feel like we have to pull together as an industry and use our collective skills and experience and talents to be able to move forward together, and not only for the benefit of society and the industry and our homeowners, but for the profession as well, because this will be a big change for current practicing appraisers, but also for future generations.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think that's one of the interesting things. While people may have kind of like, wow, I got through the alphabet soup. Now you've reminded me of how much I don't like moving. And, you're talking about change. You're like, I'm so excited to talk about change. But I think one of the fascinating things here along the way is, you've had an opportunity to be at the outset, if not the incarnation of a number of significant changes over recent decades around industries that rely upon valuation. So sometimes it was directly in valuation, but a lot of times it was responsibilities or activities around valuation, and
or valuation software. When UAD went live in 2011, I was already working for ACI, and I was leading the implementation of ACI solutions for that version of UAD. And so, getting involved with things that directly impact how the appraiser does what he does, and the solutions to be able to help him leverage data, help him leverage analytics, help to be able to bridge that gap. A lot of what, if I go back to some of the first articles that I wrote back in 2010, 2011, and I think what was probably what caused me to pick up the attention of ACI is that I wrote this article that was entitled Empowering Appraisers with Data Standards. Think outside the grid. And a lot of the concepts from, a decade ago, I was really working hard to try and get ACI and other folks to take the bull by the horns. And everybody was so tied to these old boilerplate forms that nobody could see their way out of it. It really had to come from the GSEs themselves, from Fannie and Freddie, to be able to change their needs, right? Because the first UAD was really just data underlying the existing form templates.
Yes.
This version, this next generation, is not only data, but a much more detailed and expanded data set to support a whole redesign and reconception of the appraisal report, the URAR. Now, instead of having forms by property type, we're going to have a single layout and some common requirements for all property types, and then some conditional things for not only circumstances about the property itself, but other pieces that on the old form you would see as a checkbox or a blank. In the new world, some of those things won't even appear if they don't apply.
80% of all businesses fail within 5 years, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. With so many roles and responsibilities that must be managed and have nothing to do with appraisal reports, is it any surprise that it's hard to keep up, much less having a sense of peace, stability, and profitability that comes from growing your business? Given all of this, you might already be thinking about exiting your business one day. Don't miss the limited opportunity to work with Michael, a real estate expert and professional coach. He has worked with more than 300 owners and entrepreneurs to find their highest and best use by solving problems that reach their most important goals. Compress decades of learning into days by working with Michael. Michael is famous in real estate and business coaching. With his help, you can accelerate your growth, increase your quality of life, and earn more money, all while ultimately doing less. Michael helps you not just grow your business, but also find new purpose in it and in your life. If you're ready to take control instead of being controlled, contact him on LinkedIn or email him at michaelh@paru.com.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. And that concept of only having what you need show up in front of you, while very helpful, is going to be tumultuous amount of chaos for people that are very much maybe spatial learners and spatial operators. Like, well, it's like right there. It's like, well, there is no there anymore.
That's right. That's right. It could be in the same general vicinity, but I will say that there was a lot of effort in focus groups and professional designers that the GSEs employed to help with that redesign. And they designed that URAR not only for a lender, but also for the consumer. And the same folks that they used for the loan estimate and the closing disclosure redesign were involved in this. And there was just an awful lot of attention paid. I think folks will be really, if they can get over the shock, they will be really impressed with how the reorganization of information allows for a better story to shine through. And that's what we as appraisers, I do have an expired trainee license that I acquired several years ago. And the reason I say that is because I really am trained as an appraiser. I just was never fully credentialed.
Well, but Liz, for what it's worth, I was actually going to ask that question, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I really, kudos to you were you still in Northwest Indiana at the time that you were a licensed?
I was just a trainee. I was in Colorado.
Oh, you were in Colorado.
I was in Colorado.
Because at that point in your career, I think you were 14. And it's amazing. You're like the youngest person moving through the licensing.
Yeah, I was 14.
14. Okay.
And I dabbled at trying to become an appraiser for the same reason many folks do. It's like, I like houses. I understand the business. I want the freedom. I want to be able to pursue other things. And what I found was, because I didn't have a family member that was an appraiser that would take me on, I couldn't find anybody back in those days who would be willing, unless I wanted to work for free. Yeah. And so I had to take a job in order to try and pursue that. And, I've had the opportunity to work not only because of the software jobs that I've been involved in or the data jobs that I've been involved in, but I've had the opportunity to work with some really fine appraisers. And one of my business partners today is a very fine appraiser. And, I have a lot of respect for the profession, and I always try to employ all of those good tenets of what it means to be a good appraiser into the solutions that I work on that support appraisers.
I think that's a helpful connection point for a lot of people to recognize that having had an opportunity and chose to take on the education, like, hey, I'm going to give this a go, and then experiencing the, holy cow, this is ridiculously hard, which harkens back to one of our episodes.
Good job.
Yeah, one of our season 4, highly rated episodes where he shared, like, look, I literally went to work for free for like 3 months. And then the person I was working for is like, oh, you're pretty good. Actually, we want to pay you. But it's like, wow. There's not a lot of places. I shouldn't say, there's still some. And if you want to go work for ESPN, you're going to work for free for a while. But there's not a ton of it. And if you want to be in software design, like games, that is, like, there's not a ton of places out there where you're going to go work for free to get experience because you want to gain access. And they're like, appraisal just doesn't seem sexy enough compared to, say, ESPN or EA Sports or something else along those lines, like World of Warcraft. Like, I don't think so. But like data studies, woohoo, massively sexy. People like, this is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. One of the things is really fantastic, because you've had so many different opportunities to be involved in not just the industry, but different companies that have had efforts, some very successful, some not so much. What is, when you look back over your, I guess now that you're approaching, 34 versus, your 20 plus years of in the industry and plus, like, what are the trends that you've seen that maybe someone who has not had an opportunity to operate at such a macro level, because you've really seen the macro exposure of this industry where so many people, myself included, for a lot of my professional career in and around valuation, very micro focused, particular property type, particular neighborhood, maybe a little market area, MSA. And you're like, whoa, like you're zooming way out. You're flying at like 30,000 feet. Most of us are walking, we're traveling from one place to the next on like a bicycle. And you're like jet, plane. Share a little bit of that perspective, because I think that helps some listeners, whether they're residentially focused, commercially focused, specialty property type, like all of this is influencing the industries. It's just coming first through residential.
Well, and to that end, the majority of my experience would be from a residential finance perspective.
Yes.
So I would say, oftentimes I think folks have to understand that it's not just an appraiser and a banker and a homeowner or a home purchaser in a town by themselves anymore. So, through my whole career, what I have been fortunate to be a part of is this machine that has become the mortgage banking fueled capital markets. Yes. And so when we look at it and at that level, we have to understand that, in today's world, the underwriter reading the report that an appraiser has written might be 3,000 miles away from where that subject property is and may not have any understanding of the nuances of that market. And they're relying on the eyes and ears and the ability for that appraiser to really provide a well-crafted opinion and well-supported appraisal with all the information that reader who is not familiar with the market and not familiar, unless they're, surfing Zillow or any of the other things. And even that doesn't provide the same level of understanding. And that's not only true of the underwriter, but that is also true of, the folks that are looking at the collateral and looking at the loans that are being put together in portfolios that are going to be sold into the secondary market and that become a part of a mortgage-backed security and then are paying dividends into an investor. So each one of these homes, each one of these appraisals, each one of these loans are a part of a much bigger ecosystem that we all are impacted by in our society and in our economy. So it's really important that we not think about it just as this little one-off, but actually it has a very important role in its life cycle of how it's going to contribute its part as a loan, as a revenue generating vehicle, right, into our economy.
Yeah, that's another huge point for me. I mean, when you look at, the mortgage-backed security industry, there was a period of time it did not exist.
Right.
And most people have no sense of how massive the space is and therefore how much influence it has and what it's become. And they're like, oh yeah, there's something called mortgage-backed securities. I watched The Big Short, or, I saw the movie 99 Homes, but like, you just don't really get it. Like how many zeros are to the left of the decimal point. Right.
They might have more of a It's a Wonderful Life opinion of it.
That's a nice way to
SNL.
Yeah. Because that's where it was until, some impressive financial engineering created a new product called mortgage-backed securities. And in one way, it opened up an awful lot of capital. And in another way, we also got to see a lot of not good, how we would say it, loan files being put together, AKA when the caca flew into the spinning object and called the Great Financial Crisis. Were there all kinds of messes because of how poorly documented many of those files were.
Right. Exactly. And now we're in, an age of technology and data. And, we as individuals, as consumers, can get more information at our fingertips and with a couple of Google searches than ever before. And, that does mean that as we move forward with things like the new UAD and new technology and new capabilities to use tools like AI to scan photographs and technology that can, scan a building and generate a floor plan in the volume dimensions. All of this technology has to be used responsibly. It has to be tempered with a professional eye. And so, I think that for folks that maybe are concerned that the age of the appraiser is ending, I would caution them to say it's changing. It's changing, and it requires that professional eye, that expertise to be able to not only read the tea leaves, but to rationalize and perfect what the machine can bring to us.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, that when, in a good way and a bad way, people just look at their own lives and they can see what are they doing in their life. I'm not talking about employment, just whatever they're doing in their own life, like the TV that they own and the streaming services that they have on or they access through that smart TV, or maybe their connected devices in their home, or like one thing after another. And many ones are creating that opportunity. And we're in this very interesting period where there's so much creation that is ongoing that it's like, man, if you're willing to just take a little bit step back and say, there's a lot more here than what I've been doing. And yeah, of course, it's going to require some learning, much like, I don't know about you, every time I get a new cell phone, I know how to use like 3% of the features. And if I want to learn a few more, I'm going to have to learn or find a young person to have them teach me. Like, show me how to do this. Could you just do that again for me? Could you just take a little video of yourself doing that so I can refer back to it next time? One of those things. But there's so many roles and opportunities that are going to be coming available over the next several years that don't even exist today in many people's perspective. And you're at the forefront of that.
Yeah. It's going to be really, I think, up to the individual to really step up and understand. I think, the other concern that comes to mind when we start thinking about getting ready for UAD is that you can't just rely on, well, my software provider is going to take care of everything for me, and I'll just let them do it, right? We have to get everyone to understand that they have to be a part of knowing what's coming and knowing what it means for them. And, things are going to change. And one of the most interesting things about this rollout is the GSEs have specified what they want the output to look like. Here's our new report layout, and here's our data requirements. How you get there, right? That's going to be up to you and who you do business with.
Yes.
And so so the form, the old template, right? Everybody used the old template. That was the user interface, right?
Yes.
So you might have had some different bells and whistles, whether you were an ACI user or a Bradford user or a la mode user,
Sure.
but you were essentially looking at the same thing, right? And orienting around that same piece. So I think folks will have an opportunity to really understand, where am I going to get my biggest bang for my dollar, my software dollar, with my solution, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just that I have to now produce this new data file and this new output layout. I also have some other widgets and tools and access to data and other things that might be more in line for me to take a look at. It's been very difficult for appraisers to, changing software is difficult for an appraiser heretofore. And it's been kind of like a religious
for anybody. It's not just appraisers. I used to run manufacturing companies. I've run all kinds of businesses.
It's
any system change is always tough.
It's a big deal. But I wouldn't, even if you wind up still choosing your existing provider, I wouldn't discourage folks from just being aware at this point in time when this change starts to come forward. It's an opportunity to reevaluate, especially if you're at a place in your career where you're going to be, working for several years forward, that you might want to make sure you've made the right choice, because it's going to be a big change, and there's a lot to learn. However, there's going to be, a number of training opportunities. I know GSEs will be rolling out stuff. Various education providers will be rolling out stuff. Conferences will be rolling out stuff at the end, Q4 of this year. I know there's a couple of conferences happening. So I just really want to encourage your listeners, whether they're appraisers or not, if they're users of appraisal services or providers of appraisal services, please engage, please pay attention, get involved, understand what's happening, ask questions, and really don't be afraid of the change. Embrace the change, but be aware.
No, I think that's so important as allowing someone who's further along in the whole process of change that's ongoing to be able to sound a call to raise up one's awareness, to be informed and don't just kind of just wallow like a little penguin and follow the one in front of you. Like, hey, make your own decision here. Like, be informed.
I've been working with another group. In addition to MISMO, I'm also involved in a group called the Collateral Risk Network. And
you want to share what CRN is? Not everyone knows what it is.
CRN, Collateral Risk Network, is a group of folks that are engaged in collateral risk assessment. So we have lenders, chief appraisers, underwriters, AMCs, appraisers, and software providers, all from a kind of a cross section of the industry, who come together on a quarterly basis. And actually, we have a conference call every month to talk about current topics, and we have quarterly meetings. And the CRN has a standards committee, which yours truly has also been heading up. And we have been working on not only providing the ground support for the business case for this new procurement data sets standard that MISMO is going to be working on. It came from the CRN work. And then we also are working on a set of topics for our members to help them start to unpack and understand what is this UAD thing, and what's it going to mean to me, and what do you mean there's no form number? So there's an operational readiness component that everyone, regardless of what seat you're in, should be undertaking as we get ready for taking on this new industry change.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting. I mean, and while it's, we've talked a lot about things around it, I think what's also so fascinating is the role that you've had. And for a number of people listening, they might be considering how does someone even get involved in something like this? How maybe could I take a step in that direction? When you reflect on your career and a lot of the different employment opportunities that you have had, what guidance would you offer them? Because, I mean, you literally, to your credit, have touched so many different segments of the industry. As opposed to going one by one, we've talked much more generally. But, boots on the ground perspective is actionable for others. What might you offer to them?
I would say, MISMO is a really great way to get involved. Again, we're volunteers. We'll be publishing our information on the MISMO website in terms of when those new meetings are going to take place on that new structure. You don't have to be a member of MISMO to come to a meeting. You just have to be a member to vote on things. Got
it. And what is the value for someone who has probably never been involved in this and doesn't probably even know what MISMO stands for? Like, what's the benefit for them just starting to be part of this volunteer community?
As volunteers and the stuff that we work on, I think for a new person, it's a great way to be exposed to the current topics at hand, and to understand kind of a little bit of the background. MISMO, by the way, stands for the Mortgage Industry Standards Maintenance Organization. It's a data standards organization specifically for mortgage banking. And so it's a great way for folks to get involved. It's kind of a hands-on learning opportunity. Even, oftentimes we love to have people who are like, I don't really know anything about this. I just, I'm an appraiser and I'd like to understand more about what this change is. And it's a learning opportunity. So CRN is a membership-driven organization. There's always, outreach at different conferences where folks could get involved. But I think, especially as you navigate your own personal journey of what your career path is going to lead to and how these opportunities can assist you in your progress, talk to people, get involved, and get involved in things outside of your comfort zone, which, one of the great things about the conferences that we have in the industry, from Appraisal Buzz, Val Expo and the Appraisal Summit is that it does tend to bring folks from a variety of backgrounds together. And
Yes.
it's an opportunity to get some CE and then also to, meet people and talk about what's going on. I think networking is really important as we start to move through this change. That's
Yes.
one of the things that, hearkening back to 2008 and HVCC, before then, most appraisers were trained as staff appraisers at a bank.
Yes.
And if you didn't work for a bank, you worked for a firm. And
Yes.
so you were never really on your own. And so with HVCC, I always kind of joke and say video killed the radio star, right?
Yeah.
And so that put a lot of appraisers out into this singular operator position where I'm just going to, contract and be a 1099er and I'm going to get gigs through AMCs. And it's caused, I think, a little bit of a situation where folks didn't get as much team support and mentoring as they could have long after their credentials were satisfied.
Yes.
And so I really strongly encourage folks to come to conferences where they can reach out and network with others.
No. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. And yes. Being connected, being able to, as they'd say, stand arm in arm creates a strength that far exceeds what any one person can do.
Sure.
And removes you from being an island, which can even just be like a little leaf in the wind, and you're gone, which is phenomenal. I think it would be helpful because you have had so much amazing experience along the way. Could you share maybe more recently in the last, say, 5 to 7 years, some of the opportunities, maybe generally or even specifically, that you've been able to be a part of because of the work that you've previously been doing? Because sometimes people just kind of get stuck. They're a bit, I don't want to say they're narrow-minded. I just say they're maybe limited in exposure to how much opportunity is out there. And you're doing some really cool stuff. You want to share a few things that you have been able to get involved in?
Well, I mean, I have been involved in a couple of would-be startups that didn't make it. Some of them were as a direct result of just my knowledge of data and data standards.
Yes.
And the interesting thing is that, you have, I guess my friends would probably also say I'm a bit of a risk taker. You have to have courage, right? You have to realize that, you might swing and you might miss.
Exactly.
Or you get a hit, but it's a foul ball, right? And so, I've been fortunate enough to be able to have some wins that sustain me through the losses, and to be able to always try to use each opportunity to learn more and to be able to apply that on a go forward basis. And that on that note, not everything is non-transferable, right? And so, data management, data standards, the work that I've done in startups, project management, product management, design, all of those things can be applied in many different industries and sectors. Yes. And also have applied in my world, in my personal volunteer work. So whether it's organizations that I'm involved in is a hobbyist or in civic organizations, all of those opportunities that have come to me have come because I have been willing to take a risk. And then the other thing I would say is that I'm usually willing to do the work, right? I'm a data standards professional, not because I tell a bunch of people what to do. I'm writing data maps, right? I'm actually doing the work. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty and to get involved in stuff. And I find great satisfaction in that. It's kind of like gardening or any other creative activity that I enjoy. Yes. Getting involved in those things at the ground level really gives you an opportunity to learn and understand. So, some people might think, well, I want to be treated as a manager, or I want to be treated as an executive. So all those things would cast doubt on my ability to be an executive. So I can't do that. I would strongly say that's the cool thing about getting involved in other opportunities that are outside of like your company or your comfort zone, is that you can try stuff because you can take on some things that are not so closely tied to your identity.
That's a powerful statement right there that a lot of people can really embrace in and of itself. I mean, Liz, given everything that you've seen and everything that you've experienced and all that you've been exposed to, what are you looking forward to or optimistic about over the next 3 to 5 years?
What I'm most looking forward to is that I am engaged in a couple of startup ideas, and I'm trying to work through different lenses to improve how we do valuation, but also how we empower homeowners. And I think that, understanding, again, that ecosystem that we talked about earlier, how everything fits in that ecosystem. And the other side of that is the very important human concept of shelter and the importance of helping folks understand home, whether that's traditional home ownership or other ways that we can help people learn and be educated as to how they can create aspirational wealth through their day-to-day needs of having shelter, right? Yeah. Which comes with learning how to budget and learning how to understand the mechanics of how do you maintain a home. And so that's what I'm most excited about.
And what, for those that hear the words, but they're kind of like, I can't really get my arms around it. What does empowering a homeowner mean from the perspective of an opportunity you might be getting involved in?
Well, empowering the homeowner to me means that they understand the obligation of their mortgage and they're not afraid of it, that they understand the duties of and the stewardship of home ownership and being able to see beyond just the 3 to 5 years that they plan to live in this home. What does it mean for generational wealth? What does it mean for whatever stage of my life I'm in? So that to me, an empowered homeowner is a confident, secure, safe homeowner who is in control.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Liz, we have covered so much in such a short amount of time. This is extremely impressive, consolidating decades, not even into days, but into about an hour. So thank you so much for sharing so robust. Hey, it always goes by fast. You're like, I don't know if we can do this. I'm like, I think we can. I believe in you, and the format works. So that's amazing. And friends, as we shared, there's so much available here in this. You probably need to go back and listen to it again. But there's probably a few people that you can think of that like, wow, this might be informative, or hey, coming attractions, it's better to be informed versus surprised. At least that's the way most people like to approach it. So we encourage you to share generously at this point in time. And of course, continue to do the great work you're doing. And we're so honored to just share some perspective, and we can all learn from each other in the process. And that's what this podcast continues to do. So Liz, thank you for helping, just moving this whole group forward.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed our time together and our conversation, and I look forward to seeing folks out on the trail this year as the conference season kicks off. Yeah. And, you can hit me up on LinkedIn, or we can, also talk about some information to post on your site about the MISMO organization and CRN.
Oh, very much appreciate that. Well, friends, you've got it all there. Until the next time, have a fantastic day.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Pa Zing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing professional paths and achievements of our beloved guests. Before we go, please subscribe on your listening channel, Spotify, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. After you drop a comment below, who is one friend and peer you can generously share this episode with? If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Pa Zing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.